Hi everyone. Hi Charlotte again. We've already met before. Thank you so much for joining. I'm talking to the audience and I'm switching to you in a minute. This is, if I'm not mistaken, the third of the so-called DIGI Talks. It's a series that we started with the aim to, for the audience of the FDFA staff around the world. That's why also we're streaming it. To enhance your digital skills, we try to bring forward some topics that we think are of importance also to the work of a foreign administration officer or diplomats. And today we're going to deep dive into cybersecurity, and cybersecurity specifically with links to the humanitarian sector. I have here with me Charlotte Lindsay. Charlotte is currently and also here in her position as the Chief Public Policy Officer of Cyber Peace Institute, which is a Genevan non-governmental organization based in Geneva, as I said before. I think you might want to explain briefly what you do, Charlotte, but also has the head of a former Director of Digital Transformation of the ICRC. So I think you're really the perfect combination of cybersecurity and obviously the work of humanitarian actors, with the ICRC being one of the most important humanitarian actors, of course, for Switzerland here in Geneva. The format's going to be the same as always. We're going to just talk for around like 25-ish minutes. And then we will open for questions. If you have questions, you can either comment it on Vimeo, which I understand is a bit complicated. So we offer you also the possibility to send a direct message via Skype to my colleague Roman Hunziker. So his abbreviation is HUROM, H-U-R-O-M. You can just send him. I will see it here on the screen, and I can ask the questions to Charlotte. So that's the way how you can interact with us. But allow me to again warmly welcome you. Thank you for making taking the train from Geneva to be here with us and to help us also brief the colleagues abroad and in Bern on cybersecurity and the links to humanitarian work. I would probably start the discussion with very basic principles. Cybersecurity very often is kind of a bit difficult to grasp phenomenon, specifically if we don't work directly with it every day. We hear about big cyber attacks. We know about the very, very dramatic attack ICRC has suffered, I think 2 years ago. But could you help us like categorize probably a bit what is it? What is a cyber attack? And also what's probably like I've told you before, I've seen this pyramid of like between the garage kids until the state-driven attack. Could you help us explain a bit like what are the different forms of attacks that exist?
So thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting me. So yes, I think the humanitarian sector has traditionally been a very proximity-based actor. So it works in situations of conflict, natural disasters, and it was very much focused on being present on the ground. And I think what has happened in the last decade is digitalization increasingly in the humanitarian sector, and this has changed the threat landscape from just being proximate-based threats to also virtual and digital-based threats. And I think that's really where the humanitarian sector has now had to increasingly focus. If I look at what's happening, who are the threat actors, I think primarily what we can see is a threat landscape which is both opportunistic, so cyber criminals who can see that the humanitarian organizations or other sectors are rich in resources and are interested in just pure criminal activities to access those resources. But then you can also see range after that from nation-state actors, so actors which are states which are trying to infiltrate, to get access to, could be resources, can be intellectual property, can be data of another nation-state actor or organizations within a nation-state. And then you have also what are increasingly collectives or hacktivist groups, which we are seeing particularly the emergence of over the last couple of years, because we can see a convergence between geopolitics and also cyber incidents. So as the world has got more and more insecure, and we're living in a period of high insecurity at the moment, and also strong sovereignty and a lot of situations of conflict, you can see also that the cyber incidents have increased, linked to those geopolitical threats. So a state may make a statement or act in support of another country. For example, it may recognize sanctions regimes. It may support the membership of a country to NATO or to the European Union or other regional group. And you can see then there is an increase of cyber attacks or cyber incidents which are linked to those statements. So you can definitely see this nexus or convergence between geopolitics and cyber incidents. And no sector is immune from that. So the range of threat actors can be cyber criminal, can be hacktivist or collective groups, can be proxies who are working with or on behalf of a state or nation states. I think most of us sort of have in our mind this notion of the individual in a hoodie in a garage. A few of those, but the most, they exist, but the vast majority are linked to some sort of cyber criminal group or hacktivist collective proxy group. And those have just proliferated over the last few years. I think probably accelerated by the pandemic when more and more people moved online.
Right. So when you say you mentioned like a NATO meeting or a conference in general, that you see an augmentation of attacks. So what is an attack? I mean, how concretely, how does it look like? I think we've read also in Switzerland, we've read about a so-called DDoS attack to the parliament. We obviously regular basis receive this email about alert emails and phishing attacks. But could you describe very concretely what is it an attack, or how does it look like? How could we also, the colleagues online, how can I imagine what does happen from these emails probably that we get that you have received a package until that data being taken away as happened to the ICRC? Could you walk it through?
Yeah. So at the Cyber Peace Institute, we categorize sort of 4 main groups or categories of attack. We actually simply label them the 4 Ds. The first is destructive attacks. So that's really malware or that is aimed to really take down a system and destroy. So destroy data, destroy the function of a system temporarily or permanently. So those are very destructive attacks, and they're the sort of the most severe types of attacks you see.
So I'm sorry to interrupt you. That's basically, I tried to log in to send an email and bang, it just doesn't work anymore.
That would be really the infiltration of some sort of malware, something into the system, which as soon as it's activated is really aiming to take down the system. And you see those very destructive attacks. Then you'd have disruptive attacks where they're aiming to have a sort of short-term impact. And that's the sort of DDoS attack. So overwhelm the system so that it is not able to function just because there's so much traffic being driven towards the system. It overwhelms the servers, it overwhelms the system. Or it could be taking the website and defacing the website so that it doesn't say what you think your website is supposed to say. And so when people log in, they see something completely different. That can be a malicious message to somebody. So those sort of disruptive attacks, which are really aiming to cause a sort of short-term impact, not destroy the system, but some sort of short-term temporary impact. And then you have what we call the third D, which is data weaponization. And that would be a hack and leak. So that's a sort of hacking into a system, exfiltrating the data and putting that data online on the darknet, offering it up for sale, offering it up to extort the organization to pay ransom or to individuals to pay ransom. And you see the whole gamut of sort of use of data weaponization, but really hacking and leaking in and using data against the organization or the individuals. And that can be pure extortion. It can be something else much more malicious. And then the last D is disinformation, but actually cyber influence operations. And that's really where there's information which is being put out there, which is malicious, which is inherently wrong. It's false information, but to break down trust in institutions, in the nation state. So really trying to undermine people the credibility and to really confuse people about what's fact and fiction, and it can be very overwhelming, so people really don't know what to trust any longer. And those sort of 4Ds run the range of attacks. And I think one of the things which is important, dependent on where you're sitting in the world, is that, you know, primarily in democratic states, we sort of think of cyber attacks as really against computers and data. Whereas actually in more autocratic states, they actually look at controlling the information space. And there it is where actually that whole control of what is being said, how it's being said, is very much how they perceive this. This is not about particular the infrastructure or systems of the technology part. It's actually much, much wider than that. And the cyber incidents that we see, so infiltrating into systems, espionage, attacking, getting into a system, is also linked to this ability to spread information, disinformation, and control the information space. So I think you can see the sort of 4Ds are quite an interesting way to look at that. And within that, you would see, you know, an individual like you and I who are victim of social engineering and phishing to get us to click on something which exposes us to a sort of vulnerability, which could be, you know, into our bank details, or us paying money online to something malicious, right up to and include everything which can be really broad spreading of information which is inherently incorrect, with a malicious objective, which is often linked to a nation state objective about controlling the information space.
Wow, it doesn't make it easier to obviously to fight against, but just a clarification as well, because I think from an individual perspective, one thing again, when we receive these phishing emails that invite us to click on a link or something, I think the question, at least I ask myself and probably colleagues as well, is how do we know whether we've been hacked? I mean, is this? I understand from your description that could be a quite long time, quite long time elapse between probably someone getting, as you say, into the system, and you might not even feel that. So is this something that, like from CPI or from your experience, also from the ICRC, that you could share? Like, how does an organization actually realize that it's been hacked? Let's say, I don't know if you're allowed to talk about the ICRC attack, but I mean, I assume there's a moment that you actually, as an organization, realize either your data is being offered at the dark market, or obviously you get ransomware. But can you explain us a bit more on this moment and how to feel it, and how we would know?
I mean, I think we all have to become inherently distrustful, because it's not a question of if we will be attacked, it's when. So you have to start from a premise, it is going to happen. Have you done enough to both protect yourself and then recover in the event of an attack? So I think that's the premise which you have to start from, I think, both as an individual, but then also as an organization, because it will happen. I think in terms of understanding, I left the ICRC 2 years before the cyber attack against it, but what is it? It's public information is it was 90 days before it identified that the attack had happened. And what you can often see that there is an attack or an infiltration into a system will happen, and it will take a long time for an organization to understand. And 90 days is often the sort of range of, is often the medium rate of what will happen before an incident is identified. And sometimes it will be identified because of active screening. Other times it will be identified because you're trying to upgrade the system or change the system in some way, and it's then that you identify it. So there's a whole range. You may be informed by an actor. For example, the Cyber Peace Institute is often informed that there is a malware there, or it's something is particularly targeting the humanitarian sector, and then we can investigate that and look and say, and then provide alerts to the sector. So I think there's a range of ways of understanding, but I think what is absolutely critical is, whether it's our individual systems at home or our organizational systems, you do the upgrades, you try to minimize, because it's the vulnerabilities, you know, it doesn't take a major threat actor, state threat actor, to infiltrate a system that hasn't been patched, where the vulnerabilities are there. And I think the ICSC attack, what it's publicly put in, was there were vulnerabilities that hadn't been patched. So the door is open, and it doesn't take much to push on the door then.
So maybe to the colleagues who are not so familiar with the patching, this is, if I understand correctly, this is, I always explain it to myself as like you have a house, and then the house gets to get like little, like the bricks start to move a bit, and then you need to patch it, like to fix it again, right? So that's basically when we have to update the iPhone on a regular basis. So that's what's happening, right?
Yes. So I think inherently, software has thousands of bugs in it in terms of the lines of code that are there. There are many bugs that are put there by mistake. There may be backdoors that have put in. So there is inherent vulnerabilities in software code and all software code. And what happens when you get a message which says update your iPhone or update your computer, it's generally because either the organization itself has identified a vulnerability, so it may have been its own internal work which has identified one of these bugs, and that needs to be upgraded. Or it can be because they've been informed by an external company, and you have bug programs, so you have ethical hacker or ethical bug bounty hunters who are actually looking for where these bugs are and informing the company, and then so that they can be upgraded. And then you have a whole other sector, which is those malicious bug hunters, which are trying to identify where those bugs are and then selling them to a range of actors in order to infiltrate. And obviously the more secure the system, the higher the rates, that a cost of a bug. And there's an industry of millions behind this, where they're looking for these bugs in order to be able to sell them to the highest bidder, and then before the company has actually discovered them and patched them themselves. So, that is an industry that we have to recognize is happening behind all of the technology that we're using. And what we have to hope is that, A, the company is aware first of those, or before they become exploited by externals, and that we then have the responsibility as individuals or in organizations to ensure that we are regularly upgrading, that we're using the right cybersecurity measures, because it is a big industry.
That's the so-called 0 days, isn't it? And I think I've read that, as you mentioned as well, they being, if like a hacker discovers such a so-called 0 day, which is like a vulnerability that's not known, correct? They receive millions for that, right?
Depends on how, I mean, it depends on the type of system it is. Obviously, Apple is considered as highly secure. And so the bugs or anything that's vulnerabilities identified in that go for much, much more than something which is seen as more inherently less secure. And so, yes, it is an industry behind that. And that's why when you get a call for an upgrade, you need to upgrade.
I'm looking at the camera. No, I understand. I would like to, before we go to the geopolitics that you mentioned before, I would also like to switch to something you have presented before at the Brown Bag Lunch, a categorization of harms of cyber, and I know I've attended several cyber peace events, and also we have been in events together in Geneva, and I think what always struck me a lot, and I would like to share, maybe you could share with the audience here, is like share like a concrete example of a humanitarian actor. Because I remember once being on an event, you had, I think it was an NGO, and I remember she has been a victim of an attack. And I remember two things. A, that the CEO described that she never thought that they could be victim of an attack because they do good work. So they didn't feel threatened, and then B, after that it happened, that she had like physical effects of the attack, even though it was just her like account that has been hacked. And I would very much like to invite you to share, probably if you don't have to say which organization, but I think that hopefully helps also to the colleagues who, specifically the one from SCC and the colleagues who do humanitarian projects, like to understand the direct link that such an attack can have on the NGOs or even the field projects. I think that would be very helpful.
So at the Cyber Peace Institute, we provide free cybersecurity support to non-governmental organizations, and I think that what is very interesting is that most organizations aren't aware initially of whether it's an attack or not. And the example that you talked about there of a Swiss NGO that suddenly saw very strange activity in its both on their professional and also personal devices. And they didn't know what this was, but they just knew it was out of the norm, and happened to contact me and say, look, this is really strange. And I said, no, this sounds like an attack. And they said, no, we don't think it is. And in actual fact, we then did a forensic investigation for them and discovered, yes, they had actually been a victim of attack, both professional and personal devices. And for the CEO, she was really actually felt an enormous responsibility to her staff whose personal devices had been infiltrated and data being put in, and actually pornographic data in this instance, and something that was very disturbing for them and could be illegal. And also she felt that even once when she discovered what it was and that it was a malicious attack, then was not certain what to do about it. Who do I call? What does this mean? And whereas if it had been a break-in to the office, she would have known automatically, I need to call the police, or I need to call authorities. But because it was on her devices, first it was difficult because it was technology and she wasn't sure if it was something. And then when she did, she wasn't actually sure what was the process to do that. And also how to recover from that and actually put in place systems. And I think what it demonstrates is also the uncertainty that we have around technology, that we know it works until it doesn't work, and then we're not actually sure if it's our own personal problem or if it's something to do with the system. And so there is an uncertainty and an anxiety that suddenly lack of access creates. But then as a CEO, her responsibility to staff. If you look at something like the attack against the ICSC, I think what they knew was that had accessed the data of 515,000 people who were already highly vulnerable. And it was the Restoring Family Links program, so it was linked to highly sensitive data about individuals separated by conflict or disaster or violence. And so not knowing also what exactly was why it was being infiltrated, whether it had been exfiltrated, whether that data had been taken out, how it was being used or misused, and the sense of distrust it creates, the reputational issues for the organization, the sense of responsibility of staff who've, are reliant on this system, and then having to take the system offline and work, offline, but then go out and have to inform beneficiaries that their data may have been impacted. This creates an enormous both psychological impact, but then not knowing what the risk is, and fear for beneficiaries who you're there to protect. And as in the humanitarian sector, the basis is do no harm. And if you suddenly think your work is in some way or helping to create or to some harm towards people that you're there to serve, this is an enormous sense of betrayal and sense of distrust towards systems that you've relied on because they have been able to help you amplify your programming. And so I think that sense of both the dysfunctioning that it creates, because you have to find other ways to function while the system's being repaired, but also the anguish and the anxiety of not knowing what's the motive behind it or what's happening. And with cyber incidents, is often you can't share a lot of information about the actual incident, particularly for an organization like the ICSC. It was very open in providing quite a lot of information to really help the sector understand that it, as a big organization was invested a lot in digitalization and security, was at risk. And I think what it demonstrates is just the changing threat landscape now. Not only is it this proximate base, because organizations are on the ground trying to support, to protect and assist victims of conflict or disaster, but also, in addition to the proximate base, there is this vulnerability now because of your digital and online presence, and balancing the two, whereas on the ground you can understand, you know how to manage and understand the environment, asking people, is it safe to go somewhere, you know, engaging and trying to really read your operational environment. In digital, it's often the headquarters that's managing a centralized system. You don't control that. You don't necessarily understand, and that's, I think, a real change in the landscape and how it's been affected over recent years.
Yeah, and I think also, I mean, it's also a reputational harm potentially, right? Mm-hmm. Besides the financial harm that the system doesn't work, and then you have to make it work again, so you lose time and effect, and you threaten people.
And for donors, they may feel that, you know, that's a reason for smaller NGOs. They fear that if they do talk about the cyber attack that's happened, that donors may actually try to withdraw funding, or they will see it as actually a fraud. And therefore, you know, some donors have quite strong anti-fraud programs. They say the NGO has to return money that's been exfiltrated under a fraud. And so it can be very difficult for an organization to actually talk publicly about that type of vulnerability, because it can be a risk to their future. And we supported an NGO that was working in Afghanistan that was a victim of an exfiltration of money, actually a CEO fraud. Somebody pretended to be the CEO and managed to exfiltrate over $1 million. And that NGO almost went out of action, because it just, you know, it was an enormous risk for it. And so, you know, again, the Cyber Peace Institute helped them to both to respond to that, but also to try to recover some of the money that was taken. And I think that you see a whole different landscape of threats that you just were not exposed to before.
Well, thank you. Before, I do have a final question, but I would like to talk to the colleagues online. If there's question, I think there's no comments on the Vimeo. I'm looking at the colleagues. No. If there's any question you would like to send through Roman Hunziker, it would be now the moment. Otherwise, I'm looking at the screen, but I think there's nothing. So allow me to continue before we close down, because it's already over almost. I think for me, on a kind of a positive note, if you allow me to say there's one coming. Yes, there's one question before, so I give the floor to, that's a lot to read.
Hi, Aurelie.
So the question for the colleagues who cannot, of course I will have to read it, because the colleagues online cannot say. So the question, thank you Aurelie, the question is basically that, it's a fact that many organizations, small organizations and even bigger ones, don't have the money to set up a cyber resilience. So what could be done? Allow me to say, from a Swiss host state perspective, this is specifically why we also try together with the NCC, so the National Cybersecurity Center, we tried to set up an international Geneva Cybersecurity Center for exact that reason, that we try from a host state perspective to strengthen the cyber resilience with many other partners, including Cyber Peace Institute. But yes, I think that's a big challenge, and that actually goes very, very like in hand with the questions I had to as well, together with the one from Aurelie, is that luckily now in the new message to the international cooperation strategy, as well as the Swiss national cybersecurity strategy, in both like the humanitarian sector and the international Geneva is being seen as a stakeholder for the Swiss cybersecurity strategy, and the international cooperation strategy also sees the cybersecurity as a topic that has to be taken into consideration. But is there from your side like something in addition to that, or like more concretely, that we and the colleagues and Aurelie specifically could do to enhance this? And also an answer to Aurelie's question?
I think definitely of the 4 Ds, which is most likely, it's the disruptive attacks, because that's the sort of DDoS, that's the defacement of website, that's the sort of the typical attacks that we're seeing. What we see we work with nearly 250 NGOs, of which 50 some are in Geneva, and we see they're being attacked every day. So, they've said, practically every day there's some sort of attack. So I think it is firstly important to recognize not if, but when. recognize that there is that cybersecurity precautions that need to be taken, dependent also on the sorts of data you hold. So the more sensitive the data you hold, the more you're going to have to invest in systems to protect that. I think so. Building up cyber resilience, it's not a one-off. It's a journey that you have to go on and continue to do. The Cyber Peace Institute does offer free cybersecurity to NGOs anywhere in the world. So we will match them with volunteers who are trained, who are specialists in cybersecurity, to help them build up resilience. And that can be just the basis of security right through to education of the board. I think as donor countries, it's also to recognize that programs are not any longer just offline. They're increasingly digitalized. The whole logistics system, the whole financial system, the HR systems, they're all digitalized. So you should, including inherent to donor contributions to NGOs and IOs, has to be support to build up security, cybersecurity. And I would say on the disinformation front, this is about building or trying to build distrust in institutions. So the more important your institution is, the more the risk is of disinformation. And we've seen a lot of disinformation against the ICSC also in recent years, trying to build, to create distrust in the organization. So I think that that's critical, that you recognize that actually managing disinformation is also like managing a cyber incident. And so increasingly the responses to that are very much along the cyber incident, managing cyber incidents. There's a pre, there's an attack, and then there's post. And I think you have to look at disinformation in that realm. And I think that if we see that the whole range of attacks that can happen, you have to map your threat landscape as an individual organization, and then look at where do you see yourself as the most vulnerable, and then how can you deal with those vulnerabilities, get support from the national level, understand from your National Cybersecurity Center, what are the risks that they're seeing inside the country, but then also look how can you build that sort of cyber resilience and get support for that.
Well, thank you so much. It is quite a heavy topic, so I did try to kind of end with a more like an active role of what could we do to contribute. So thank you for giving us some ideas, and also to the colleagues. Thank you so much for sharing, giving a bit more beef on the a bit difficult topic of what is actually a cyber attack, and what to understand a bit better the word cybersecurity. It was very helpful. I hope it was helpful as well for the audience. Just to announce that the next DIGI Talk will again take place in 2 months time. You will receive an invite by my colleague Nadia. Again, we will most probably talk about a bit similar to the topic, but we will talk about submarine cables. Many of the colleagues in Africa, you've probably seen it in the internet, have been cut down because the submarine cable has been, I don't actually know the details, but was kind of damaged and didn't work, which exactly put them out of work, basically. So we thought it would be interesting to invite an expert to explain us a bit how the internet actually works and what could be the consequences if it doesn't work. And I think it goes a bit in line. Here we talked more about the malicious actors, but it can also just happen because of a natural problem or so. So I hope to see you again in 2 months. And if you have any topic questions, then just send us an email. Then we can also invite probably an expert to talk about it next time. Charlotte, thank you so much for again taking the time and sharing your knowledge on cybersecurity and humanitarian work with us. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.